Everybody, and welcome to our 18th edition of Scale Up Sayside with PGC. I'm here today with Paul Manivanna and Hishem, and we're going to discuss how to win, attract and retain business in the US. Two exceptional speakers today. Paul, who runs a business specifically designed around sort of reducing the failure in startup recruitment businesses in that 0 to 5 year stage, which is really important to hit the ground running. And Hishem, who has, this is Hector, CEO and founder of an all-in-one training platform for recruitment founders aimed to maximise team performance. So we're going to get some really good insights today from both of our speakers. Without further ado, we'll just get stuck straight in. So I guess my first question, in fact, I'll actually start with a little bit of a statement that I speak to a lot of recruitment leaders and founders, and often I'll get mixed messages of the market's good, the market's bad. Some will say perms up, some will say perms down, some will say contracts up, some will say contracts down. And I think for me, recruitment and life, you've always really got to be working above the line with that ownership, accountability and responsibility, and really try and stay away from working below the line where you've got the blame, excuse and denial. And today what I'd really like to demonstrate for our audience is what sort of things can you do on a day-to-day basis to really take ownership, accountability, responsibility in terms of making yourself in the best position you can possibly be in to win business. So, Paul, Hishem, how are you finding things at the moment in terms of the US market? Have you got any insights from Paul, what you're currently doing at the moment, or Hishem, anybody that you're speaking to?
Oh, I'll let you go first.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for that, Hishem. As you guys know, I've been sort of there regularly for the last just over 12 months. I think nine occasions I've been across to the US in different states in the last 12 months. I was there actually when SBB went down, on the Friday that it went down, and was actually spoke to a couple of the kind of the founders and tech founders that I was meeting on that evening, and they were all really obviously worried about what was going to happen. I don't think anybody could say that the market is up. I think it's been a tough year. But what I really do think is that there are options. There are, and I think it's about stripping it back to its simplistic form. If all the business owners who are on here, if you looked at the top 5 clients and you thought, okay, what are their characteristics? You would have in their personal relationships. You would have great performance. You would have long-standing friendships potentially, and all of that. And I think that Clarke, you talked about ownership, accountability, and responsibility. I think the market is tough, but if you focus on being accountable to the market that you're trying to serve, providing great information and advice, great added value, and you immerse yourself within those communities and create those relationships, then there is still a lot of business to be won out there.
Bill?
Yeah, I guess my thoughts, just to frame for everyone, I think it's important, particularly when you're giving us your time. The position I'm talking from today is for the last 5 and a bit years, I've hosted a recruitment podcast where every single week for 5 and a bit years, I've either interviewed the current top performer or a recruitment entrepreneur. So I'm like acting as a sponge from that perspective. And then also my business is supporting growing recruitment companies that want to get more out of their team by using our training platform. So today I'm not like Paul in the States. I haven't, been there for 10, 12 times. I wish I had. New York was my most favorite trip last year. But I'm talking today from like the context of who I speak to on a daily, weekly basis, just to sort of frame that up. I think that's important. I think, Clarke, for me personally, I think just as human beings in the world today, having more personal responsibility can go a long way. So I think for any of you that want to be more successful in a challenging market, which a lot of people have described the market to me as a challenging market, a tough market, but these people focus on what they can control, and there's a lot that you can control. So I think for a lot of people this year has been challenging. For a lot of people that I've spoken to, the first half of the year was really challenging. I've got an interview with someone over the next couple of weeks who was the top US contract recruiter for a business, built it from scratch. He got his book up to 35K weekly GP. It went down to 3K weekly GP. That is a tough pill to swallow. So he's now got that up to more 2025, and he's done that this year. So I think, for a lot of people, it has been challenging. Let's keep it real. But I think you guys have been in the game longer than me, so there's always things that you can control. But I think comparing your performance to last year is where you're going to go wrong. Yeah. For a lot of people, it was an anomaly. So you're always going to feel like, I could be doing more. I'm not doing as good as last year. I don't think that's the right barometer. So they're the things to maybe share, but definitely a lot more positive sentiment for people in the market right now. From what I'm hearing, there's always pockets of things that you can control, focus on. It just might not be as good as last year, but I think a lot of people are in that boat.
Well, really, really good. Thank you. So I think everybody's aware that the US is the largest addressable market in the whole of the world. There's a lot more opportunity out there. The margins are good. And I think sometimes people can be in danger of saying, do you know what? I've grown an amazing UK business. I'm just going to go straight over to the UK. UK recruiters, in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion, are the best in the world. And we're just going to go over there and it'll be an absolute walk in the park. But it's almost like you're starting again. You're building your brand again from the US. Have you got any thoughts around that and the brand and how you would... I think you talk about it, Paul, an omnipresence in the US.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that there's so much to be learned from what we've built here in the UK. I think that and the US, from my experience and the many people I speak to, that they're really impressed by the way that we go about our business and the way that we recruit and the level of those recruiters. I think, again, to my initial point, think about the way that you've built your business in the UK. Think about those relationships and the way you've created that environment for sales and that ecosystem. And it's about kind of encapsulating what that is and then really hyper-targeting a location, which I think is really important because a lot of people talk to me about like taking the US. Well, if you look at some of the stats that you guys put out, talking about, I think Texas has a bigger GDP than the UK. So you're talking about huge expansions of areas, and I think being more realistic on the location you're going to be, then really hyper-targeting the market you want to serve, understanding that challenge, and then immersing yourself within that ecosystem, being there regularly, being part of that ecosystem, part of that culture, growing out advocate and affiliate networks to provide a feeling of omnipresence where you're there remotely, you're there electronically, via social media, but you're also there on the ground at specific strategic times to show that you're actually embracing that culture and you're being part of that community, which is what we would do in the UK. It just feels a little bit sometimes like it's like those shiny stars and we're just going to send out 5,000 emails a week and make 100, cold calls and it should work. I'm not saying that doesn't work, by the way. I'm saying there is definitely a place for that type of business development. Mm-hmm. The real wins are in building that omnipresence and that ecosystem.
Yeah. And how do you go about that, Paul, without giving too many of your secrets away?
So from my point of view, it was just, again, without kind of going too much into detail here, it was looking at sort of what does the ecosystem look like in the UK when we build this out and we build, the connections, the games of golf, the drinks, all of these type of secondary connections, brand ambassadors, people within certain organizations who refer you in. So my thought process 12 months ago was, how would I create that in a land and expand process within a certain area? So the first area that we went to was Austin, and we looked at Austin. We planned out 4 specific visits. The first visit was all about movers and shakers, understanding the landscape there, and building out kind of what that looks like in terms of influential people, different organizations you can get to grips with. And then there was a second, third, fourth visit that was all planned, and they were all specifically planned around creating these ecosystems and these communities that you could then sort of speak to on a quarterly, monthly, weekly basis electronically via video calls or emails or LinkedIn messages. You could get them to a point where you could create real authentic relationships. And that's what we've done. We've created real authentic relationships, friendships. And because of that, you've then got what we call brand ambassadors, or people on the ground who are at all these events in this specific city, and then are feeding back these potential opportunities and creating those connections.
Brilliant. And how about yourself, Hishem? What are you seeing in terms of almost starting to build that brand again from the US? Is it something that's needed to be done, or can you go in using your existing brand from the UK in terms of some of the insights you may have seen?
Well, I think back to your earlier point, I'm definitely against this perspective of, the US is going to be easy. I don't actually think people view it like that. My perspective of it is, it's just as hard, but the rewards are way higher. That's sort of how I would say it. It's been just as difficult for people. I think a lot of companies that I've worked with or spoken with or people I've interviewed, not all the time, but a lot of the time I found, I don't know what Paul's found, but a lot of people do try and build as much traction as possible from the UK.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people that are in the UK working US hours. I know a lot of companies that just do the US, but I work in the UK, sorry, but from the UK they do the US hours. So I do feel like a lot of people, the go-to-market strategy has typically been building traction and trying to do some of the things that Paul has mentioned. I think I text a bunch of people that I've interviewed that have been on this journey of working their absolute socks off from the UK, doing the late hours, doing the calls at 1 a.m., 12 a.m., closing deals, building traction. A lot of them, it has taken 6 months, 12 months, 18 months to really build that traction. The number one thing that they've all said that has been their number one way of getting business this year, you're not going to learn anything new here, guys, is relationships. That's exactly what Paul is talking about. So really doubling down on relationships, whether that be, like Paul said, like, yes, you are in a different country if you're doing it from the UK, but have those planned times that you're going to be in the US and really maximize them. How many people can you meet? Who do you want to be meeting? And definitely committing to that. I think it can go a long way just by being in the country a couple of times a year. I know a lot of people that are building a really successful business in the US from the UK that are there a couple of times a year. Yeah. So unfortunately, it isn't anything new. It's the fundamentals. I think compared to the UK, just quickly, again, definitely what I think is true, Clarke, you'll know this more than me, but of course it is a lot less saturated in the US. That is the other positive. So I think, why UK recruiters have typically done well there from the conversations that I've had is the UK model is, not every business, but most, is niche, focused, build those ecosystems that Paul was saying, know who you need to serve, know who needs to be in them. I think US, typically, that hasn't been the case. It is, I work with Paul and he can recruit my software engineer, he can also recruit that. That might be wrong or wrong, but that's typically what I've heard. So having that niche focus, committing to building relationships, it's just as hard, but the rewards are a lot higher.
Yeah. You're absolutely spot on there, Hishem and Paul. We will always advise people because Paul, I'm sure you'll have all heard this yourself, that somebody will say, I want to go to the US and I want to conquer the whole of the US. Well, you're going to need a budget as big as Coca-Cola to conquer the whole of the US. Yeah. Really, you've got to laser focus and niche down. And in terms of sort of building those relationships, in the US, they have something called at-will employment. So that means by federal law that the employer can let the employee go at will and without reason. And the employee can leave. You've probably seen it on a Jerry Maguire movie or some other US movie. They pick up a brown box and they leave because they can also leave at will and without reason.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Which makes it a highly transient market. So actually, once you've built a relationship up with a recruitment agency, actually they need you at the drop of the hat, which is one of the reasons why you can really drive those margins up. But also why it's equally as important to ensure that you have got those long-term sustainable relationships rather than the transactional, because once you're in and you've built it and you've got that trust and you understand the values, you can really win a lot of business long-term from those agencies. So I guess, have you got any specific examples that you know of where somebody has built a good relationship or how they've done that, for example?
So, I mean, I think from my point of view, I can point to some of the relationships that we've grown. So what we try to do is we look at the target audience. So who do we want to speak to? That might be founders, it might be CTOs, it might be founder teams. But then what we do is, rather than kind of spread too far that way, we go a bit deeper. So when I say deeper, we look at the ecosystem around them. So who serves those people? Which services go into them? Is it payroll services? Is it insurance? Is it kind of the periphery services? And we look to kind of create relationships with those guys as well, because they're serving your client as well, but just in a different service. So how can we create relationships with those guys to then provide inbound leads for us as well. And so we look to really deepen that, and we have relationships with VCs and work with those across the board as well. And it's about kind of understanding each of those of that group's drivers. So what does the insurance person or company, what are they really driving towards? What are the VC driving towards? Understanding those, and then creating a relationship that works both ways. I think that those have been the biggest wins for us this year. I think dealing directly with founders is really difficult because in the current market, they're getting absolutely hounded daily, weekly, hourly with cold calls, with messages. So what they've done, I think, with the founders and the capacity that I work in as a fractional chief people officer, and I get to really look under the hood with this, is that they've created WhatsApp groups where they know which recruiters to block. They've got a whole network here trying to fend this off. It's more about kind of finding the relationships around them, and then gaining trust. And being authentic. You've got to be authentic, because the minute you get found out that you're doing it for the wrong reasons, then it's going to be open. You've got to be really open about why you're there. Don't, be really clear about what it is that you do, but also add lots of value and really encompass those relationships around the target audience to create a feeling, and rightly so, of that they feel safe and that they can trust you in that respect.
I guess just to add to that, Paul might disagree with this, but the most common, so I'll be honest, one thing that I've taken from people that have been successful in the US market, who have done the UK market, is they've said how they found it to be really, really candidate-led. So I really do like the idea of what Paul's talking about, and I've spoken to a lot of people who've had real success on getting into VCs, private equity firms, becoming a preferred supplier, getting introductions that way, absolutely. So I'm not saying this is the only way. I think, it's about having short-term, medium-term, long-term strategies around how you're going to be building trust and credibility with these people. But from a lot of people that I've interviewed, I interviewed a guy not too long ago who was the top performer for a company. He's based in Austin, Texas, did over $1 million. He did that through sending a load of targeted specs. And I'm finding a lot of recruiters I interview are having a lot of success or getting in front of people with really great talent, and that's helping them then forge these relationships. So again, nothing new, but it's about how can you do what we all know we can do, but better.
Yeah.
That's what it's about, because everyone knows we can do candidate specs, but how good are you at doing them? And how targeted are they? How are you approaching them? Are they landing in the inboxes of the right people, et cetera, et cetera? So in terms of forging relationships, I would say most people I interviewed, they'd say it's been very candidate-led from their experience.
Yeah, and I think I'd add to that. I wouldn't disagree with that. And I talked earlier about omnipresence, and that's about doing all of the things at the same time, but being everywhere. So kind of sending the candidates, still trying to make the calls, certain elements of the business, and growing the relationships. And I think that it still is candidate led. And I think that part of the reason why that is because from the layoffs that came the back end of last year, there was then this feeling in the industry that we don't really need recruiters anymore because we've got this huge stack of amazing people. And I guess what has been found out since then is that actually finding a needle in a haystack is harder than scraping the barrel. And I genuinely do believe that, and actually a lot of the people that we're working with at the moment are saying, we don't want to put an advert out, because we put an advert out and we get 400 applicants and 399 of them have never even done what we've even asked. So, and actually that part of the market is really tough. So I think that being candidate led, maybe going into TAs, back into TAs with candidates is a potential opportunity. I think the only challenge with that is it kind of creates this just get a couple of jobs mentality. And what are we doing then once we get with this supplier, what we're doing then to create that relationship, to create that environment and that omnipresence, to make sure that we don't just get this role, but we get the next 10, 20, 30 roles. But yeah, I would completely agree that if it's working, go for it.
Yeah, I think, Paul, you've touched on something there around not just getting this role or the next role, or specifically going after a role and really looking at the network around. Is that something that you do?
Yeah, it's something that I'm really passionate about. Obviously for many years I ran a recruitment agency, and the thing that worried me the most was the fact that you get some roles, you finished up with those roles, and then you're back to zero. And I think that's why so many companies like contract, and they like, having that constant flow of revenue. So for me, what I try to do is, of course, I mean, if we're speaking to people and they've got one role and they've got two roles, then we'd love to work with them. I'd love to plug them into one of our partners. And we would never kind of turn that away. But for me, really, it's about building relationships where you've got sort of 5 to 10 this year. You've got a company that's growing. We know at which point they're going to receive some funding. So we know, we're plugged into the funding rounds as well. So we know that they're getting some funding at this point. And at that point, then they're going to double the team. So we can really project out then that if we maintain this relationship and we excel, that actually we can do 2, 3, 4, 5 this year. But we know that the money's coming in March of next year, and by June, they're going to need to double the team. And it's about creating those types of relationships for me, with the clients that I work with.
If I can just add to that, Clarke, I actually think what we're talking about here, I definitely agree with Paul. The best recruiters are really good at increasing the lifetime spend of their clients.
Yes.
Okay. And they don't just have the visors on and they get a job. It's like, Paul, tell me about this software engineer. What do you need, et cetera, et cetera. That's all they're focused on, right? So someone, it's from an episode that I released this week, actually, it's really hit home. It's from a guy called Josh Keeley, has his own recruitment business called Trident Search. A lot of the business they do is in the US. And something he said, which really stuck with me, they don't train their team on recruitment. They train them on commercial acumen. I think this is what we're talking about here. We're also talking about sales process. So what Paul's talking about and how he gets to those points is he doesn't just ask questions about the job at hand. If I'm a very good recruiter, I'm saying, hey, Paul, how do we end up here today? I know I, presented a candidate to you, which, seemed like the type of people that you'd like to hire. How have we got here today? Why did you come back to me? What have we tried so far on the recruitment standpoint? What have been your biggest frustrations when working with agencies? If you don't get this person, what happens? Who's applying pressure for you to hire this person? Is it if you don't hire them, then the VCs aren't going to be happy because they need you to be spending their money, whatever it may be? You have to ask the commercial questions. And something that all of you here today could potentially consider and think about is, do you actually understand how your clients make money? Like, do you understand what P&L is? Do you understand, what they have to present to the VCs that they have to report into that makes them look successful? Do you understand the genuine problems that they have in their business, which isn't just around recruitment and getting this particular job? So I think, what we're talking about now is being really smart with understanding your job as a recruiter, which is to understand the problems that you solve.
Yeah.
And the sooner you stop chasing vacancies and you chase problems, the more money you're going to make, and you're going to be seen as a partner, not a supplier.
100%.
And I think that's like absolutely key. And what we're talking about here, which is fundamental.
Yeah. Can I just add to that? I think that is 100% the right way that in terms of the way that I see it as well. Solving those problems is the absolute key to every person that you're speaking to, and understanding those problems in the first instance is the main part of your job when you're speaking to anybody, whether you're selling recruitment or anything really. Understanding that particular problem as soon as possible is the only way that you're actually going to be able to provide a solution that somebody's going to want to pay for.
Yeah. And you can advise on what solution is best for them, right? Because I think what we're also talking about here, guys, we don't have to go into it, but I'm a huge advocate for including a discovery step in your sales process. I think if you go straight into a job briefing call, sometimes you have to do that. But if I'm saying, hey, Paul, look, I can absolutely speak to you about this job that you really need help with. But for me, in order to best advise you on the best solution, what I'd really recommend is we spend 15 to 30 minutes so I can actually understand your business, where you're at, what have you tried so far, what hasn't worked, so I can then say, well, I think it's going to be worth us having a proper job briefing call because I'm going to have a solution that I think can solve the problems that you're facing. Yeah. So adding that extra step before the job briefing call or going straight in there is going to enable you to unearth these important problems and make you be seen as a partner and a problem solver, not a supplier.
Yeah, 100% there. I think even if we probably all look back, I know myself personally, at some of the best relationships I've had with recruiters, that the people who've took the time to understand my needs, what actually is my problem at the moment, what is it in the future, do they understand the values that I'm looking for? And once they've done all that, actually, you're reducing the recruitment process time anyway, because you end up putting the better people in front, the people who are more fitted, rather than sending a load of CVs through.
Yeah.
Paul, I think we had a coffee last week or the week before, and you actually spoke about sort of looking at the common themes, which relates nicely actually into what we're talking about. The common themes in terms of what does your best the sales look like? What does your best end client look like? And then you start to spot themes within that.
Yeah, I think it's a real kind of, it's something that I try to work through with certainly with my clients and with people that I speak to, is kind of, okay, if you were to think about your top 5 clients right now, okay, and in most businesses, their top 5 or 10 clients, depending on the size of the business, probably would attribute for at least 50% of their revenue, at least 50%, and would probably be more. So within those 5 clients, what are the similarities between the way that you brought them on? You know, were they recommended? Was it a warm referral, inbound? Was it an email? Was it a call? And if it was a call, as Hishem has alluded to, which I think is great, you know, what happened during that call? How was that call kind of fleshed out? How did you build that relationship? Was there an element of courting, you know, that went back and forth? And I think if you looked at your top 5 clients and started to look at kind of the way in which you brought them on, the way in which you've developed that relationship, the excellent way in which you've delivered, and then being able to communicate that delivery, you'll start to find lots of similarities in terms of relationships, in terms of layers of communication, layers of reporting, excellence around delivery. And if you have delivered to these guys, there's probably a reason for that, because you've got that amazing skill set within your business, or that ability to really hit the mark. Maybe, you know, you understand them the best. If you think about that and you bottle all of that up and you pick that up, what we need to do is to find a location that you want to be in the US. And then we need to overlay that across that location and think, how are we going to recreate that process? And this is not about creating a fake relationships or fake kind of business deals. It's about really committing to it. And you've talked a lot about commitment today, Clarke, and I think that's really important. It's really committing to that area, to that piece of work, and looking at all of these amazing things which brings on the best clients, and then building that ecosystem and that environment that recreates those relationships, but doing it in as speedily a way as possible, whilst being authentic. So it's not an easy challenge, but it's something that you can distill into something that's much smaller and then drop into, a specific location.
Yeah. Sorry, Hishem. Yeah, please do.
Sorry. So you asked me for one of my 1 to 3 key takeaways. This was one of them that we're just talking about. Because what we're actually talking about here, I'll be honest, for me, I actually think is quite basic personally, but a lot of people don't do it. And what we're actually talking about here is, for the founders here, the managers here, if you were to, ask 5 of your team, please can you describe to me the ideal client that we work with, why we work with them, why they're users, what their challenges are you confident they're going to be able to answer? That's something that I'd really consider, because this is a really valuable exercise to do. We're going into the end of the year, you're going to be reflecting, thinking about the year just gone, the year ahead. And I think a really valuable exercise with what Paul's talking about is really understanding who your ideal client is. Like, how big are they? How many stakeholders they normally have? Are they founder-led? Do you normally deal with hiring managers? Do they have a TA team? What problems do they have as an organization? Not just recruitment, but what problems do they have as an organization? What are they driven by? Like, really understanding and getting under the bonnet of your ideal client. And this is such a valuable exercise, because you can then equip your team with this. And so many people that we work with from a training standpoint, like, they don't know where their next client is coming from, because they don't know what they look like. It's a really good exercise. Take a step away from the weeds and really think about your processes and systems. And one of them has to be, are we all aligned with who our ideal client is and who we can serve best? And I think that's such a valuable exercise to do.
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you go through tough times, sometimes your whole mindset can change, and you almost lose sight of the fundamentals, the basics that actually got you to where you were today. Yeah. And then you end up in a process of, I need to change something quickly. Let's just throw enough stuff at the wall and hope some of it sticks, which I do see a lot of recruiters doing today, and just throwing out as many emails as they possibly can. When actually what we're talking about here is relationships, understanding people's needs and fulfilling them with a right solution.
I think, I mean, it's just to touch on something you've mentioned there, Hishem, which I think is completely right. We haven't talked about today about marketing and about social media, but at a really granular level, if you did the exercise there, which I think is a great exercise to do, by the way, I think I would do it across the business and I would try and collate all that information and then come to a final point. If you then have a target audience, once you get that target audience and you know who you want to speak to, you then, I mean, people talk all the time about kind of, well, what type of stuff do we put out to these guys? Like, how do we do it? Like, how do we speak to them regularly without boring them and trying to sell to them? Well, one way that you can do that is by, if you've got your target audience, you list 10, what are their 10 biggest problems? Like, what are their 10 biggest challenges that they have? And if for every one of those 10, you look at, like, number one, okay, this is the main problem that they have, and look at two or three times where you've solved that challenge. Yeah. So testimonial, whatever you want it to be. You do 2 of those and you work all the way through that list. If you do 2 for each of those, you've effectively got 20 pieces of content there, which is all added value. And guess what? If you've actually identified what those challenges are, and then you start posting like solutions where you say, hey, we did this, we had a client who had this problem and we did this, and this, we bespoke built the model and brought this person in or whatever. What that will do is it will talk to your preferred client. It will talk to them. They will get up. They'll be scrolling through LinkedIn or they'll be scrolling through the internet and they'll see this and they'll almost believe in that moment that somehow you've got into their mind and that you were there serendipitously to solve their challenge. But that is one way that you can create great content and great kind of that hits the spot of the people that you want to target.
Yeah, great content is content that's relevant, and you're only making content that's relevant for people if you know who it's intended for.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, so we'll start to wrap up, but just before we do, how about one key takeaway here, whether it be common sense, fundamental basics, or something more intricate? What would you say for our audience?
So for me, it would be commit to the project, focus on relationships, focus on creating a sales environment, an environment where you've got authentic and real relationships. Don't just look at the hyper-targeted group of people that you want to speak to. Look a bit wider, try to forge those relationships as well, and look to build out advocate and affiliate programs and people who are brand ambassadors for you, who can provide you with a regular stream of inbound opportunities and leads that will help to build your business, not just in the short term, but in medium and long term. And most importantly, make sure that you're going out there or that somebody representing you is going out there and helping to build those relationships face to face, because they're going to really need that. Like, they're not just going to take a relationship based upon emails and video calls. You're going to need to go there. They're really social. When you go to the US, I know you've definitely been there, Clarke, and they're always open for dinner and they're always open for lunch and they're always like willing to come and meet you for a coffee. They're very, very focused on that personal touch as well. So I think commit to it, create the ecosystem and the environment, and make sure that you're strategically, as part of a campaign-driven enterprise, meeting them at strategic points and growing those relationships really, really strongly.
Yeah, I think you're greatly increasing your chance there as well for recommendations, referrals. Yeah. If you do something well once, they'll often tell somebody else about
100%.
it.
And it's fun, right? Who doesn't want to get on a plane to the States and meet people, right? Who doesn't want to do that, man? Especially me. I want to go to Austin, Texas, Matt. I want to go to Austin, Texas big time next year. So we've actually covered a lot of mine. So my 3 key takeaways were: educate your team on commercials, not just recruitment. We covered that. Ensure your team have complete clarity on who their ideal client is. We covered that. So I guess what I'd leave people with, which we've touched on, my other key takeaway was clearly document your how on important BD processes. Again, I think a lot of people underestimate this stuff, but do your performers that aren't maybe as high performing as your high performers, do they know how the high performers are doing what they're doing? So a lot of the time it's in people's heads, and you might have someone who's got this shit hot candidate spec in a certain way, getting really great response rates, and no one else knows how they're doing that. So I think clearly documenting your how, so you've got those internal processes on things like, how do you open up your cold calls? How do you overcome common objections? How do you approach dream clients? How do you pitch your services? How do you solve your customers' problems? Are these things documented? Do your people know how these things are done? Or every time on the call, on a video call, are they winging it? Are they learning from their last call, which didn't go so well? They're still trying to get better on this call. thinking about documenting the how, thinking about playbooks so your team can go to them and then know what best in class looks like would be my key takeaway.
Amazing. Okay, Paul, Hishem, well, thanks a lot for your time. If you do want to speak to any of us after this, then please feel free to contact any of us directly. We'll be more than happy to support you in anything that you're doing. And you can catch this podcast on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube channels. Okay, everybody. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Want help mapping out your US expansion? Visit us at www.pgcgroup.com to learn more or schedule a free US expansion opportunity session with one of our consultants.